All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Picture this. We are looking at a fiercely volatile 6th century Arabia. You've got the massive Byzantine Empire up to the north, the powerful Sasanian Empire over in the east, and right smack in the middle, a barren, rocky valley that is about to become the absolute center of the world. Today, we're exploring the crucible of character, the birth and early life of Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We'll be tracing the intense socio-religious conditions of his time and the truly profound events that forged his early years. And this brings us to a really compelling question. How does an orphan, someone born into an era defined by brutal tribal warfare and profound personal grief, eventually rise up to become the single most trusted man in his entire society? It is an unbelievable journey. We are going to unpack exactly how this flawless character was forged in such a chaotic environment, relying strictly on the historical and traditional accounts of the time.
Section 1, Pre-Islamic Arabian Society. Because to really understand the man, we first have to understand his world. So let's set the stage in Makkah.
It's actually a crazy contrast when you look at it. On one hand, Makkah was this bustling commercial hub. Since the surrounding global empires were basically always at war, international trade had to shift to overland routes through the Hijaz. As a result, the local Quraysh tribe amassed incredible wealth, running these highly lucrative caravans up to Syria and down to Yemen. But on the flip side, this massive economic boom was paired with severe moral decay. We're talking about an era known as the Jahiliyyah, or the Age of Ignorance. Those older, noble tribal values of protecting the vulnerable, they were fading fast. Instead, society was just plagued by endless blood feuds, the exploitation of the weak, and a deeply rooted pagan tradition that had over 300 idols housed right inside the sacred Kaaba.
Section 2, the Year of the Elephant. Because right in the middle of all this, that fragile, wealth-driven society was about to face a massive geopolitical crisis. And it literally marched right to Mecca's doorstep in the year 570 CE, which, amazingly, is the exact year of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam birth.
So here's how it went down. Years prior, an Aksumite governor down in Yemen named Abraha built this massive cathedral called Al-Khalis. His goal was to divert all that lucrative trade and pilgrimage away from the pagan Kaaba. Well, when one of his emissaries was assassinated by an Arab tribe, Abraha unleashed a massive punitive expedition. We're talking 60,000 men and a terrifying secret weapon, war elephants. It was literal psychological warfare meant to just crush the Meccans. But traditional accounts report this stunning climax. The lead white elephant, a massive creature named Muhammad, simply knelt down at the boundary of Makkah and utterly refused to enter the sanctuary. No matter what they did, it wouldn't budge. Now, facing this completely unstoppable army, the leader of the Quraysh, who also happened to be Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's grandfather, Abd al-Muttalib, made the stunning decision to evacuate Makkah's population into the mountains. He made this incredibly powerful declaration. He said, "The owner of this house is its defender, and I am sure he will save it." Talk about absolute reliance on divine providence in the face of certain annihilation. And well, that reliance was met with an incredible response, exactly as it's recorded in Islamic tradition and specifically in Surah Al-Fil of the Quran. The accounts describe flocks of birds, called ababil, suddenly appearing from the sea and dropping stones of hard clay onto Abraha's army. This triggered a devastating epidemic, which some historians describe as a virulent outbreak that utterly wiped out the invading force. The Kaaba was miraculously preserved. And this event was so monumental, so worldview-shattering, that the Arabs literally reset their local calendar. From then on, they just called it the Year of the Elephant. Section 3, Noble Lineage and Deep Loss. Because while the city was still reeling from this grand geopolitical miracle, a much more intimate and deeply tragic story was unfolding right inside the city. If we trace the Prophet sallallahu and noble lineage back through the highly prestigious House of Hashim, we find his father, Abdullah. He was a handsome, well-respected merchant who had just married Amina. But shortly after Amina became pregnant, Abdullah had to leave on a Syrian trade caravan. On his way back, he fell incredibly ill and had to stop in Medina. At the painfully young age of just 25, Abdullah passed away before he ever even got to see his son. So the crucial takeaway here is that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born an orphan. Sources note this served a profound purpose, actually. Growing up unlettered and without a father meant that his future knowledge and message could only be attributed to divine revelation, not human teaching. But man, the heartbreak doesn't stop there.
When he was just 6 years old, his mother, Amina, decided to take him to Medina so they could visit his father's grave. And on the return journey to Makkah, at a desolate place called Abwa, Amina suddenly fell ill and passed away too. At just 6 years of age, he became a complete orphan. He experienced a profound, deep grief that would forever shape his incredible empathy for the vulnerable later in life. Section 4. Blessings in the Desert. Let's actually rewind just a bit to his infancy, because before his mother passed, he experienced a very unique cultural upbringing.
You know, back then it was super common for Meccan elites to send their infants out to Bedouin wet nurses in the desert. The idea was to make sure the child grew up in fresh air, learned pure, uncorrupted Arabic, and really absorbed the freedom of the nomadic life. And you have to hear about the incredible turnaround experienced by his wet nurse, Halima al-Sadiya. When she arrived in Mecca looking for a child, it was a year of severe famine. She was practically destitute. She had a dry camel and a weak donkey. But the very moment she mercifully took in the orphan Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the tradition reports immediate barakah, or divine blessing. It was like night and day. Her milk overflowed, her donkey suddenly became the fastest in the caravan, and her pastures out in the barren desert miraculously turned fertile for the entire 5 years he lived with them.
However, his time out in the desert ended with a startling, highly profound event known as the chest-slitting incident. According to the traditions, when he was around 4 or 5 years old, 2 men in white garments suddenly arrived while he was playing. They opened the child's chest, extracted his heart, and removed a black clot, declaring it the portion of Satan. They then washed his heart with Zamzam water in a golden basin before perfectly sealing it back up. Naturally, this miraculous and terrifying event prompted Halima to return him to Mecca right away, but it fundamentally symbolized his divinely protected and incredibly pure upbringing.
Section 5. The Forging of Al-Amin. Following the devastating loss of his mother, he was taken in and protected by his fiercely loving grandfather, Abdel al-Muttalib, and later his uncle Abu Talib.
His youth was basically a masterclass in character building. He absolutely didn't grow up spoiled. He worked as a shepherd on the outskirts of Makkah. A really humble job, but one that taught him immense patience, solitude, and the space for contemplation. Later on, his uncle Abu Talib immersed him in the intense world of high-stakes commerce. At just 12 years old, he traveled on a massive trade journey all the way to Syria. It was there that sources note a fascinating encounter with a Christian monk named Bahira, who actually recognized signs of his future destiny. All these experiences exposed him to the wider world and the sometimes harsh realities of human nature.
So what does he do with all this worldly knowledge? He uses it to fight for justice. Following a really sacrilegious war, several Meccan tribes got together and formed the Hilf el-Fudul, which was essentially a social justice alliance. Its sole purpose was to protect the oppressed, mediate disputes, and ensure fair trade in a city that was largely driven by greed. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was an enthusiastic participant in this pact during his youth. It's a brilliant detail because it shows that long before any divine revelation, he was already actively dedicated to societal justice and standing up for the weak. As he grew into adulthood, his reputation became absolutely bulletproof. He started managing trade caravans for Khadijah, who was a very wealthy and respected noblewoman. And he conducted her business with such absolute integrity, precise honesty, and skill that he returned with unprecedented profits. Remember, the Meccan society was plagued by deceit and moral decay, yet they universally bestowed upon him 2 legendary titles, Al-Sadiq, the Truthful, and Al-Amin, the Trustworthy. They trusted him implicitly, not just with their money, but with their biggest disputes, like when he famously resolved a massive crisis during the rebuilding of the Kaaba.
And that leaves us with one massive provocative thought. We've just watched an orphan survive unimaginable loss, be miraculously protected in the desert, and actively choose the path of absolute, uncompromising honesty in a deeply corrupt society. So the question is, how will this unlettered, perfectly trusted orphan, a man known by everyone simply as Al-Amin, respond when he sits alone in the cave of Hira at age 40 and the heavens finally speak to him? That is where his perfect preparation meets his ultimate destiny. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.